Welcome back to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLaren, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. I'm excited to share this story with you, so let's dive in. So imagine, if you will, being 18 years old, escaping a difficult home life, only to be robbed of everything you own and left with nothing, and then trying to find your way forward. You enjoy a little bit of success in life, maybe quite a bit of success, only to find yourself stuck in a very, very difficult relationship and having to leave that behind again. And you successfully get out of that, only then to discover someone you love very, very dearly is diagnosed with cancer. And this is just the beginning of the story. David has a heck of a story. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Coach John. What's happening?
It's a pleasure to have you on, man.
Yeah.
As I started to learn some different elements of your story, I'm just blown away by everything that you have been through. And so we're going to get into that. But before we do, I always like people just get a little snapshot of where you're at right now and kind of what you're up to.
Oh, thanks. You know what? I just real quick. You know, when I interview people that were the most ridiculous people ever, right?
Yeah.
I would go like, "What? Like, huh? You did what? What happened to you?" And they go, well, "It's no big deal," because they're just living their life, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I love about uncovering stories. I know you uncover stories and you love that too. Is that it's shocking what people go through, and you're just sitting there in amazement, and they're just like, "Well, whatever. I'm just living my life," right? And so
There's something about it. We normalize it. I mean, you know, I've got a backstory as well, and when people hear it, they're kind of shocked at it as well. And I think, well, but it's kind of my life, and these things happen to us, and we figure out a way. And so
yeah,
and that's what you've done.
It's weird to frame to frame your story around the fact that it might be shocking, because you're just like, well, I just live my life. So
it's just my life.
So back to your question, what I'm doing now, I split my time between like 10 different things, like everybody else I know in life. There's a term, we call them polymaths, right? People that do multiple things. And I work in finance. I write. I guest on a ton of podcasts. I do some charity work. I do mosaic artwork. I chef and host and love to hang out with friends. And I just do everything I can to fill every day.
Right. Yeah. You certainly don't lead a boring life. That's for sure. I often wonder, you know, when we're children, and the thing that we sort of picture, maybe this is how I see my life panning out. And then you look back and you go, well, gee, that wasn't what I saw happening over the last 20, 30 years.
Oh my God, no way. I mean, God, I grew up saying, okay, I'm going to be an architect, or I even thought I was going to be an aerospace engineer, and I loved math, and I loved drawing, and I loved those kind of things. And I'm just like, man, that's where I'm going to go. And the one thing I knew coming out of my home life was that if I ever did get lucky enough to meet someone and have kids, that I wasn't going to do most of the things that my parents did. I really admire people who look back and go, oh, my parents were role models. I have a friend, I'm seeing him later today. And if you ask him the question, who are the two greatest people you've ever known in your life? He will say unequivocally his mom and dad. He goes, they literally are the greatest people that ever lived. They both passed, but he goes, nobody's even close. And I'm like, wow, isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
So I know people like that, but I'm the guy that's the opposite of that. Like I said, coming out of that life, I'm going to try to do everything the opposite.
In a nutshell, you know, because you mentioned before we started recording that you left home at 18 and you're really trying to get away from that home life, you know. What and only share what you're comfortable, but what have it made you like, no, I got to get away from this as soon as I can?
Well, so, you know, we don't know what's happening around us when we're young, right? Your kids have no idea what's going on as toddlers, even as young kids. You know, they're on their own little bubble, and as they start to gain enlightenment, they start to realize perspective around their life and the world, and you start to grow or whatever. And you know, I didn't know much, but as I kind of got older into my teens and it all kind of gained a little bit more perspective. Basically, I was raised by parents who are nearly 40 years age and difference from each other. Wow. So when they met, my mom was 18 and my dad was 56. And a couple of years later, I was born. my sister and then me, just like 13 months later. Um, and I came to realize the truth of the fact that my mom was really too young to have kids and she hated them anyway. And my dad was really too old to have kids and he didn't really want them anyway. And so I think I grew up in a household that was very lonely and quiet, speak when spoken to, get out of the way, don't come home till dark, like,
Mhm.
there's a very sterile, unloving, very chaotic environment. Then add to that the fact that my mom was a very aggressive and very unhappy, not nice person.
Mhm.
And so it was just a very ugly, not fun place to grow up.
Yeah,
I mean,
no
I grew up
kidding.
in a great neighborhood, had good friends, I had some good
Yeah.
memories, but the last place I wanted to be was at home.
Mm. When I think about how that shapes like a young brain and how that influences the decisions that we're going to make in life, because
Mhm.
you didn't ask to be put into that situation, you didn't ask to live through those circumstances, and yet those formative years, that was the environment that you were living in, and it can definitely affect our ability to socialize and form and build relationships, and even maybe like our decision making. Sometimes we don't make the best decisions because sounds like there was a lot that was kind of piled on your shoulders without you asking before you really had the capacity to process and deal with it.
Yeah, yeah, that's very, very true. And I never knew, like one day as a kid, right? I could come home one day having done A, B, and C, and I would receive praise. And
Mhm.
the next day I could come home having done exactly A, B, and C, and I'd get the shit kicked out of me. Right? Like you never knew which home you're going to come home to, right? And
Yeah.
so what when you have an unsafe environment, especially for kids, right? You have an unsafe environment, and I'm not saying like, I mean, everybody had, tons of people had it way worse than I did. I mean,
Mm-mm.
it's not that bad, but when you have an unsafe environment, like you're unsafe to be yourself, you're not allowed to settle into who you are because you're always on edge. When you have an unsafe environment like that, it can affect you, and the way it affected me, and John, I didn't even realize this the last couple of years. The way it affected me was that I was always a people pleaser because I always was
Oh,
worried that if I
okay.
did the wrong thing, something bad was going to happen. So I always
Mm.
tried to do the right thing, even if it wasn't in my best interest, their best interest, or whatever. It's just made up in my head. Maybe that's the right thing. I need to work harder because that's what the boss wants. I need to act this way because that's what the spouse wants. I need to do this because that's what the friend wants. And you just don't know. So that what came out of my childhood was, and I again didn't realize this till much later in life, was just this overwhelming desire to please other people and not have any sense of my own self.
Mhm. So now you're 18 years old and
Hmm.
you're all right. I'm making my escape. I'm getting out of this situation.
Yeah.
You know, and your sister was older. Had she left home at this time?
Yeah, she had left home. She was I was 18, she was 19, so it's just
Right.
just really early on, and she had left home and was starting to embark on a good life, right?
Mm.
Um, she went to college, she met somebody in college. She stayed married to them until she died. A couple of kids, very happy, right? So she was way more capable of becoming an adult and living a grounded, decent, authentic best self. I'm sure she had her problems, but
Mm-mm.
I definitely did not. Our paths very much diverged, and at 18, I mean, it's like out of a movie. But a couple of like I left Los Angeles, went to San Diego for one night, and then drove to Vegas as I was going to make my way across the country. And like in a movie, my car broke down in Vegas, and then I got robbed at gunpoint of everything that I owned, and I ended up being homeless, living out of my car with 56 cents and nothing but a carton of cigarettes to eat. Um, so
Wow.
it was very different, and I
Mm.
didn't have anybody to call. I could have called my sister, but I couldn't burden her. I certainly didn't have a family I could have called. Need a parent would have taken the call, and I was going to call friends or something like that, and it's
Man.
tough.
And it's so interesting to hear you describe that because I think, man, of course I'd call somebody for help. But you mentioned how sort of like the product of your environment was really to be a people pleaser and not wanting to burden people and not wanting to maybe not wanting to like introduce tension into relationships.
Yeah.
And as such, you go through this experience and and you think like, I don't want to burden anybody with what I've been through, so I'll just
Yeah.
kind of
Well,
figure this out.
when you think about it, like think about a little kid that, and this wasn't me, but I'm just saying, in general, think about a little kid that is afraid to be themselves, right? Imagine that
Mhm.
kid when they grow up, they're not going to easily ask for help, right?
Yeah.
Because they're used to taking care of themselves. They don't turn to people from help. They turn away from people. So
Mhm.
I was the kind of person where, yeah, I could insulate myself growing up as a kid. I didn't know I was doing it because I wasn't aware, but I learned how to insulate myself. And so the first sign of trouble was not to go reach for help, because how was I going to do that? I've never done that in my life, right?
Mm.
And so the first sign of major trouble, I'm just like, okay, I just got to, I got to figure it out.
Right, and of course, this is I'm imagining this is pre-cell phone days.
Way pre cell phone.
Right, so you get to Vegas, you break down the outskirts of Vegas,
Hmm.
um, what happened? Like, were you, like, outside the city on the side of a dust like, Vegas is
Yeah.
surrounded by a empty desert kinda thing?
Yeah. Yeah, I was on a road called Boulder Highway, which connects Vegas, and then goes over the Hoover Dam and then on towards the Grand Canyon. So I was on
Mhm.
Boulder Highway. My car blew up, and and I I s- I was literally pulled in behind a gas station. I mean, a grocery store, and I made an assessment, and yeah, I don't want to get into the whole story, but I, in between my car blowing up and me getting to safety, I got robbed at gunpoint, like
Yeah.
by a. It's a long, crazy story, but I'd gone to a gas station, asked for help. He said, "Yeah, I'll help you," and I followed him home because I needed to stay with him for a couple of days while my car got fixed. Then they robbed me of everything. Then the woman puts a gun in my face, says, "Get the hell out of our house." And I went, "Holy shit!" So I went and got my car, and I drove to the first place that I could find was the back of a grocery store, and I took an assessment. I didn't have any clothes, because just the clothes I wore, I left them behind because there was a gun in my head. And I looked in the back of the car. All I had was a carton of Merit 100s, and I had a little change thing, and I had 56 cents. And I'm like, shit, what the hell am I gonna do? Like, what am I gonna do?
Wow.
So I took a dime, and I went to a payphone, and I called my sister, collect,
Mhm.
and I said, she said, "Oh my God, where are you? What happened? We haven't heard from you." And I said, "Well, I'm gonna go to college and do whatever." And she goes, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I just wanted to have a friendly voice or whatever. Yeah, I'm good. I'll call you." Because how am I gonna burden her with that? You know,
Right.
that was nuts.
Man. Yeah. So, what did you do? I mean, so connect the dots here, because I mean, 46 cents now because you used your
Yeah,
dime on a phone call.
yeah.
You're behind a grocery store. You got nothing else, and a
And
car
I'm
that's sort of
dumb. I'm
broken
dumb as a
down.
brick. I'm dumb as a brick because I don't know anything about the world. I'm like, emotionally, I'm probably 9,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And intellectually, I'm probably 16.
yeah.
I'm just dumb. And so I stayed there for 3 nights. I didn't I, and I didn't eat. Obviously, I didn't drink. I was just like, what the hell am I going to even do? So I just got this wild idea. As a kid, I worked at a fast food restaurant. And so I said, "Hey, I'm only two years away from that. Maybe the manager still works there." So I walked into that fast food restaurant chain, and I said, "Hey, I used to work as in high school. You could call my boss. He'll tell you I'm a good guy. I'm looking for a job."
Hmm.
So they called. The dude still worked there. He gave me a glowing reference, and they go, "Yeah, you look like you need a shower, but we'll hire you."
Okay.
And I said, "Okay, let's do it." So I got a job at Jack in the Box,
Mm.
and worked double shifts enough to. And strangely enough, the manager gave me such a glowing review that the manager that hired me said, "Well, do you live close?" And I go, "Yeah, I live right there." And I pointed to my car, and she's like, "Is there drugs involved?" And I'm like, "Hell no, I've never done a drug in my life." And she goes, "What's the deal?" And I told her, and she said, "All right, stay with me for a week until you get your feet on the ground." And I did. So
What a
yeah,
what a
that was the start of it.
you know, I just think the contrast those 2 experiences, someone taking advantage of you and robbing you, and then somebody turning around and trusting you
Right?
enough like, that's a beautiful story, the
It
goodness of
is.
humanity where, "Hey, let me fix this kid up here. He needs
Yeah.
a hand up." So, as we move forward, you ended up, I think you were gonna go to college, but did you end up going to college?
I did not. because,
Okay.
I mean, listen, I didn't have any money. I didn't have anything to lean on.
Right. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. You got to
starting
pay
from
for it.
scratch, and I also didn't have any direction as a kid, so I didn't even know. Like I hadn't been mentored, I hadn't been tooled, I hadn't been instructed on life, right? So I had to learn
Mhm.
life, and a lot of times that's hard lessons. So you learn from experience rather than somebody helping you, and that's why I like helping people, because
Yeah.
people got to live their own lives, but you could help them along, being informed and giving them some wisdom and some leadership and some tools. But I never had any of those. So I just went from one job to another, working double shifts and trying to get an apartment and make money and do whatever. And then every job I had, I ended up heading into management somehow, some way, because I work hard, because I had to work harder than everybody, right?
Right. And
Like we,
you have a knack for this, obviously, without
right,
realizing it.
and then also combine that with my need to self-preserve,
Mhm.
and combine that with my need to please other people, right? I was able to succeed at whatever job I did. And um, so I became a manager in a restaurant, and I became a manager at a hotel. And then you know, did everything I did just kind of led to more opportunity to work harder. So when was there a time to, to go to school? I didn't know that I should worry about myself. I was worried about
Right.
maximizing the situation that I was in and surviving. And then I realized, well, shoot, I'm doing all these things without having gone to college. Well, why don't I just continue to fake it until you make it? And so I ended up working for a Wall Street firm and running $100 million business for many
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, that is remarkable. Um, and I don't know if you'd be able to pull it off today, but
No
pre
way.
sort of widespread internet use and things like that,
Yeah,
you,
no
you
way.
can pull it off. And obviously, like you could pull it off to get in the door, but to have 14 years or whatever of staying power there, you obviously had a level of competency that was just kind of untapped. So along the way, you met a woman who would at some point become your wife
Hmm.
and the mother of your kids. How did you meet this lady?
So we met actually skiing, and um, going into it, I had no clue that I was actually just marrying my mother. Right.
What
Turns
an
out she was a
observation.
Yeah, turns out that she was a and strangely enough, they even looked alike. Like, how would I even have done that? Like, what? But yeah, she was angry, day to day unpredictable, very, very, very psychotic,
Mhm.
just like my mom. And every relationship I had before that was quote unquote that, right? Because
Right.
because
There's
I
this
was I
pattern.
was and I didn't, again, you don't know what you know until you know it, right? So
Mm-mm.
whatever. I forgive myself because I didn't know it until I knew it. But
Right.
I figured if I think that the subconsciously, I figured if I could have a great relationship with somebody that was as screwed up as my mother, then that would kind of repair my memories of my childhood, right? Because if I could make it good now, then I solved the equation. Does that make
Right.
sense?
It does, it does. And
Yeah.
the other thing that sort of I think about is despite like, from an outside observer, you would think, "Well, this is nuts. Why would you go, be in a relationship with someone who resembles like your sort of abusive mother?" But on the same token, that's what your brain knew. There was like a
Yeah.
familiarity in that chaos. And so even though, again, we look at it, we go, I wouldn't want to be in that situation. Your brain goes, yeah, but I know how to exist in this situation because I've been running in survival mode for so long, and that's my familiar, even if it's awful.
Yeah. I have a friend. He's a very famous musician, and he's been married 4 times. Okay. And I
Okay.
said to him, dude, I go, what the hell are you doing? And now he's on his fifth marriage. What are you
Right, right.
doing, like having had 4 divorces? And he goes, dude, it took me forever to understand the simplest thing about relationships. And I go, what? He goes, don't get in a relationship with a woman that's got daddy issues. He goes, until I learned that, I realized, what the hell am I doing? I was a terrible father. I had a terrible father. And every woman that I met, I was only attracted to women that had daddy issues because I could solve all of those problems by making it work,
Right.
but it never worked. He goes, when I finally realized that, I met somebody who has a great relationship with their father and we're wonderful together. And I'm like, damn,
It only
you
took
and I
5
had the same
tries.
issue.
Yeah, yeah. And so, so this spilled over into marriage
Yeah.
and having twin girls.
A
Um,
twin boy and girl. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, twins.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, a boy and a girl. Sorry. But so you decided, though at some point in time, I can't keep doing this. And I
Mhm.
think, you probably, obviously, if you're running a $110 million Wall Street company at this point in time, but you got these kids and whatnot, like that's got to be pretty stressful.
Yeah. Yeah. It was horrible. It was really, really horrible. And if you add into the fact that she was an abusive alcoholic, that made it even harder. And, I just kept trying harder and harder and harder.
Mhm.
And what did it was, like sometimes you just know what you know and or you hear the right words when you need to hear them.
Yeah.
And I was really at the depths of the depths. And, um, we don't need to go into the detail. It was a bad, bad, bad time. And I was complaining to a friend and I said, like, Chris, I go, dude, like, come on, man. I'm just so tired of this stuff. I'm so tired of it. And I go over my list of issues that, she does this and this is happening and this is my life and blah, blah, blah. And he finally stood up and he goes, dude, I'm so tired of hearing this crap. He goes, everybody else is not the problem. You're the problem. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? And I listed again all the crap that's been happening to me. And he goes, listen, man, he goes, here's what the deal is. He goes, you walk down the street, you see a wild animal, a problem at work, a friend that's a bad person, a relationship, somebody that's a bad person. You see a wild animal and you pick it up and you take it home and you clean it up, you give it a nice home and you talk nice to it. And then you go to pet it and it bites you and you're shocked. He goes, wild animals bite. Why don't you figure out why everything in your life is a problem that you need to try to solve? Why don't you look in the mirror and deal with your problems? And I'm
Ooh.
like, whoa, that made perfect sense at the time. You're right. Why do I got to find every single problem to try to solve? And then it all started to kind of piece together. And I went, yeah, like, why don't I care about the guy in the mirror? Like, I never have. I've
Yeah.
always protected him, or I've always tried to be a success. But like I've done, but I've never like looked in the mirror and go, dude, you're the one that matters. Like,
Mm.
think about you being your best self. I didn't even have a concept of that.
What a good friend.
Yeah.
And as you're describing that, I mean, and you're like taken aback when you hear that.
Oh
And
yeah.
it is a bit of an affront because it's challenging this deeply held belief that everybody else is the problem. But, you know, probably the best of friends aren't the ones that tell us what we want to hear. They tell us what we need to hear. And I often find myself saying we can receive a hard message if we know the heart of the messenger.
True. Yeah. True. True. And I might have heard that kind of thing or thought it many, many times, right? Because as you're sitting there wallowing in your grief, you kind of examine like, what's the cause of it? How can I get out of it? How can I avoid it next time or whatever? But all the pieces just didn't click. And
Mm.
when he told me that, I actually at that time, I was like a day or two before I was able to leave that relationship, get my kids and me to safety, and in a way that wasn't going to harm us or set us up bad for the future or whatever. We were able to do it in a very safe way. And I
Mhm.
and I remember literally standing in front of the mirror for like an hour. And I closed the door. The kids were asleep, and I probably looked like a total idiot. But I was talking to myself, looking in the mirror, going like, "Who are you? Like think about what Chris said. Like literally, who are you? Like what matters to you? What kind of person are you?" And I started saying, well, okay, you're this and you're this and you're that, which is the good things. And then I go, well, you're this and you're this and you're that, which are bad things. And I'm looking at myself going, like, why? Like, why are you a smoker? Like, why are you overweight? Why do you not care about yourself? Why do you have to, why do you have a chip on your shoulder about not going to college? Why don't you, and I just started like going like, all right, who are you? And I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't
What
know.
a talk about we talk about like a midlife crisis. And I'm thinking that this is almost like an existential crisis in a
It
sense.
was. Yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely was not a midlife crisis because I think a traditional midlife crisis says, okay, I took stock of what I've done before.
Mhm,
I'd like to
mhm.
not do that, and
Right.
I want to evolve into somebody else. And it's usually out of position of saying, I want more out of life, right?
Right. Yeah.
I was coming from a position where I felt like I hadn't begun to live life.
Mm.
because I
Yeah.
not one thing I did was out of authenticity or out of coming from the right decision making process. None of it was grounded in who I wanted to be, what my true authentic self was. It was like it was an awakening, not a midlife transformational crisis. It was like, wow, you mean I can actually care about myself? Like, what the hell is that?
It's funny. I remember when I had that realization myself, this
It's
this
strange, isn't
idea,
it?
especially as men,
Yeah,
this idea that because I think how maybe common like media sort of shapes our perception of about self-care and what it's supposed to look like. And there's sort of a very often a very feminine twist to it.
hmm,
And it doesn't really resonate with us as men. But realizing that first it starts with like it's okay to take care of yourself. Like you don't have to be a martyr for I remember someone telling me there's no medal for martyrs, man.
yeah, yeah.
Like
But
stop it.
if you used to not doing that, if you're used to framing your self care, your survival around the actions of others rather than
Mm,
your own actions, it's hard to do that. And then I literally just took a very honest assessment of myself, right? And said, okay, well, these are your good things and these are your bad things, and you got to start learning how to live your life and figure it out. Go figure it out. Go figure it out.
mm.
Start to become the person you want to be, right?
But you
I
started
hadn't
to
done that.
yeah.
So that first part was taking that honest assessment, which I had never done. I don't know that I'd ever looked at myself in the mirror and really saw myself, right?
Yeah.
And when I did look, I didn't know who I was.
Mm, mm. And so you had this catalytic moment and you go,
Yeah.
"Okay, I'm now here we go. It's time to make this change." And I think about between the before and after because we see the
Yeah.
before and the after. We see I
Yeah.
was this and now I'm this, but
Yeah.
there's a lot of work that goes in. We'd love to think like, "Oh wow, this lightning bolt from heaven. There was a change overnight and things like that." And I
Right.
imagine though there's actually a fairly difficult road that you sort of went down, but again, we can go down a difficult road if we know this is where I'm going to. And what did you picture when you said, "I don't really know who I am"? Did you have an idea of like who I want to become?
Oh yeah. Or that I could just at least try to discover and be okay with that. And the I know this sounds really silly to say, and people are gonna go, oh, would you write that on a sticky and put it on a mirror? But I was a super empathic, very compassionate, very sensitive person. Very.
Mm,
But I had no sensitivity to myself. I was not compassionate with myself. I was not empathetic to myself at all.
yeah.
At all. And so I had to learn how to be okay to fail. I had to learn how to tell people no because it was in my better interest to do that. I
Mhm.
had to learn how to tell people yes because it was in my better interest to do that. Right. I had to start becoming that person, and I had to try to figure it out along the way. So the first thing was, like I said, to take stock. The second one, which is harder to do, but I learned it over time, was to just like be easier on myself, forgive myself, just free my mind, let it go. Like you didn't know, dude. You just didn't know until you knew that you married your mom. You didn't know until
Yeah.
you knew that you shouldn't try to fix an abusive alcoholic. Until you knew, you didn't know. So just give yourself a break, dude. Like like now you know. So now that you know, do the right thing. I didn't
It's
know before.
right, and that's like the epitome of compassion.
Hmm.
And I was thinking about was it Goodwill Hunting with Matt Damon and Robin Williams? Do I have that right?
Yep.
And there's a scene where he's like hugging him, saying, "It's
Ah,
not your fault.
it's
It's not your
dude,
fault."
it'll make me cry just thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
Because you just don't know.
Hmm.
Like until you have some compassion and just say it's okay. Like I'm not gonna beat myself up. I'm not gonna be a
Yeah.
martyr. I'm not gonna beat myself up. I'm not gonna say it is the way it is and that's just life, right?
Right.
Just have some passion, free your mind, let it go, and then just go find out who it
Hmm.
is.
Hmm.
And what I wanted to do was I said, I got 4-year-old twins. I wanted to be a dad that was a good dad. I'm an overweight smoker who's stressed out and making bad decisions, about a lot of things in life. That's not a good dad. So what could I do to change that? And
Yeah.
why don't I allow myself some compassion and try to be the best person I could be for
Yeah.
me, which is
Yeah.
again sounds silly. It sounds trite, but it's just it's the center of who I am
But I
now.
think about, I think about how all of my relationships changed for the better when I had a shift in my relationship with myself, where I stopped calling myself like a worthless piece of trash. And when I stopped hating myself, I looked at everyone and how they interact with me differently.
Yeah,
And it positively affected every relationship I had. And now as a dad, I started older, but I think, man, I wouldn't have been a good dad like, earlier on in
earlier.
life,
No,
you know.
think about you said something that's so profound about how you treated yourself. I'm still learning how to not have that negative, but it's so ingrained in us to have this negative self-talk. So at the
Mm.
beginning of the year, my wife's traveling on business. I'm in the garage working out, and I dropped a 30-pound weight on my toe, a
Oh,
30-pound dumbbell on my toe. I'm a runner. I already got jacked up feet anyway, but literally a 30-pound weight dropped on my toe,
I just
and
feel the
I
pain already.
screamed bloody murder, and I fell to the ground. And the first thing that came out of my mouth is, "You're such a freaking idiot. You're so stupid. Why?" And I'm yelling at myself that way. And then I go, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa! Don't be a hypocrite. If that was somebody else that did that, would you run over to them and go, 'You're such a freaking idiot. You're such a
Right.
dummy. You're so uncoordinated. You're such a klutz. Why are you so stupid?' You would
Yeah.
never say that to anybody else. Why do we say it to ourselves?
Yeah.
Right?"
Yeah.
And
That's it.
I mean, we say we a million times, and that's the way it comes with trauma, right?
Mm.
Self-protection
Yeah.
and dealing with stress and those kind of things is we become so good at that negative self-talk. We become so good at stuffing stuff away. Become so
Yeah.
good at hiding ugly truths that it's just that can become who we are, and it's just not the right thing to do.
It's fascinating to think of negative self-talk as a protective mechanism, and it seems strange to maybe someone who hasn't struggled with it, but I think about, like, first off, I'll get to it before somebody else can say it to me, and I don't have to hear it from somebody else.
Absolutely.
And,
Absolutely.
you know, if I can take it from myself, and I can take it from anybody else, and so I'll just toughen myself up, and it's oh, man, like, it's so destructive, but interesting to have the ability to catch yourself, the awareness to catch yourself in that moment and go, "Hang on a sec. What would compassion look like?" And I
Yeah.
love that question, would you ever start yelling at somebody else and telling them like they're an idiot for doing that? It's like, well, no,
No.
you didn't consciously decide, "Hey, I'd like to drop a dumbbell on my foot to see what happens," So
Right. So not to give you too much of a tangent to go off of, but recently I
yeah.
did a psychedelic experience,
Okay.
and it was a pretty intense 3-day situation, and I didn't know what to expect going into it, and I don't know that I got a ton out of it, but one thing I did get out of it is absolutely something I needed to know, and something that I've come to terms with. I couldn't identify it like as clearly as it came through during this experience, was that I was always stuck um, in tension, and I was always stuck in, hey, if I do A, B, and C, this is the way it's going to work out. And when
Mm,
it didn't, I beat myself up for it, because it's like, hey, man, I did everything right and it still worked out wrong. And I was just like, wow, man, that explains so much in life. Like, I beat myself up based on the outcome, because I always had to protect myself. I always had to,
right.
is my mom going to come home and be violent? Is my, whatever. It was always the outcome. And if it wasn't the right outcome, then I did something wrong. And I reversed that, right? When I did that change in my life, I couldn't figure it out at the time, but I knew it recently, that it was that now I worry about the actions, and I
Yeah.
worry about what you put into it, because that's all you can control. You
Right.
can't control the outcome. I was
Yeah.
always trying to control the outcome.
Yeah.
And so all of my negative self-talk happened based on the outcome rather than the effort.
Right. And maybe the predicted outcome, the way the pattern your brain was used to seeing. So this is the expected outcome and so on. And it's interesting. I think about psychedelics sort of coming much more mainstream in recent years. and microdosing and things like that, and
Mhm.
psychedelic experiences like ayahuasca and so on, becoming more popular for sort of expanding the mind. But maybe it just speaks to there's this yearning in our society for some sort of healing because I think trauma has been passed down from generation to generation, and we
Mhm.
just play out the patterns of our parents and our grandparents, and this is maybe seen as a way to kind of a break free from that cycle. Speaking of cycling, there's a clever segue.
Was
But you've
good.
done, yeah, you took up endurance athletics, and you
Yeah.
started, maybe running and then cycling and Ironmans, and so you went from being like this overweight, stressed out smoker to like an endurance athlete
Yeah.
and doing some pretty remarkable things.
Yeah.
And you did that starting in your 40s.
Late. Yeah, 30, 39. I put on running shoes for the first time when I was 39. And
Okay.
I, having smoked a quarter million cigarettes and being, I'll talk Canadian, 30K overweight, um, you know, I was not in a position to go running. So I put on my running shoes and I tried to run down the block and I couldn't do it. Right.
Mm,
And I said, "Oh, this is not good." And so a couple days later, I ran around the block, and a couple days later, I ran a mile, and then I did a 5K. And then I said, "Well, shoot, if I can run a 5K, why can't I run a 10K? And if I could do a 10K, why can't I do a triathlon? And if I could do a triathlon, why can't I do a half Ironman?" And then I learned a very, very important lesson. So I go to do a half Ironman. Okay,
yeah.
I'm only several months away from having quit smoking and starting this journey. So I've no business being there. None. No business being there. And I drive to the start line, and it's a wave start. So I'm watching people go off ahead of me, and I'm standing there looking at these people, and they're all Greek gods and goddesses. There's not an ounce of fat on any of them. They look like they were carved out of marble, and they
Right.
look like athletes. And I look at myself and I go, "Get the hell out of here, man! You don't belong here. This is not you. Like, this is not who you are. Just go home." And I almost went home and the gun went off and the wave took off. And like 90% of the people were athletes. They on the swim, they just went swimming. And then I looked back at the start line and there was a dude flopping around on his back, and there was another guy swimming in circles. And I go, "Oh shit, I can swim better than that." I go, "They don't care about what anybody thinks. Why do you compare yourself to these other people? Why don't you just aren't you here to figure out how to be your best self? Stop comparing yourself to the outcome. Like, stop. Right? You don't need to. Nobody's thinking about you. They're thinking about
Yeah.
themselves, and they don't care. They're just trying to be their best selves. Why don't you try to do that?" And I went, all right, I'll try to do it. So I did a half Ironman, then I did Ironman, and then I did a 50-mile run, 100-mile run, and I just kept
Ooh.
going and doing crazier and crazier things.
Man, 100-mile run doesn't sound super fun, but I mean, I guess when you just keep pushing and challenge yourself, there's probably a maybe there's an addictive quality to it as well. Like,
Yeah, it's not addictive in the fact of doing the event is not addictive. Some people, I guess, might be attracted to that. What I was attracted to was I was addicted to this idea of discovery. Like,
mhm,
what am I capable? Who am I? What can I do if I want to do it? I'm not there to. I wrote this book called Winning in the Middle of the Pack, and I love the idea of the middle of the pack because, you think about when you go to a big race, right? Everybody's looking at the first guy that finishes,
right.
and they're looking at who's that last straggler that's going to make it before the cutoff. But anybody in between, nobody cares. Nobody's
Mhm.
watching. And I'm like, how beautiful is that? So I was addicted to this idea of if nobody's watching and nobody cares, that just leaves me to care.
It's
And
incredibly
that's a
liberating.
strange thing, man. But I was addicted to if I'm the only guy watching, then all right, let's see what I can do.
Yeah, yeah, that's quite something, and this
Yeah,
ultimately led you to decide, and there's a few other things leading up to it as well, but deciding to embark on this 5,000 mile journey
yeah,
across the U.S. and interviewing people,
hmm,
um, connected to cancer stories. And
yeah.
I think now I understand the inspiration behind it, but I'll let you share what might have inspired it.
So yeah, thanks, John. So, um, when I looked in the mirror and said, "All right, like who are you?" Like literally within a week of that, I got a call from my sister who we'd stayed pretty close, and so we were close. I got a call from her and she said, "Hey, I have terminal brain cancer." And so my journey of discovery was exciting and wonderful and scary, and it was going to be this long, endless journey in my mind. I figured, and at the same
Mhm.
time, she's going on an end of life journey. Like, she's got kids and a wonderful relationship and great friends and wonderful husband, and everything's working for her, and she's living her best authentic self, and that's going to come to an end. And it was pretty poignant because in one sense, I admired her for that. So I really understood how far away I was from where she had been in life. And yet I was going to get the opportunity to get there, and she was not going to get the opportunity to enjoy it. So
Mhm.
that was kind of the catalyst for it. And when um, without making a complicated story too simple, when I really started paying attention to the people that were taking care of her, and when I started to do events that would raise money and awareness for brain cancer, and just be a part of that community, I realized that people were not well equipped to deal with the emotional side of the trauma.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
we all have traumas. I knew
Yeah.
we weren't I wasn't capable of dealing with the emotional side of my kind of traumas too, but I really was taken aback by, with cancer especially, doctors, caregivers, patients, loved ones, you name it. Uh, they really don't know how to deal with the emotional aspects of that kind of trauma. And
Mhm.
so I said, well, I'd like to know why. Like, why? Right? Who doesn't relate to the fact of, you're walking down the hallway at work and you see somebody and they're kind of burdened, and you go, "Hey man, what's up?" And they go, "Oh, I just found out my aunt just got diagnosed with cancer, and it's really rough. I was really close to my aunt." And you go, "Oh, I'm sorry." And you go, like, exit, because what the hell
Right.
can you say?
Yeah.
Like, "Oh, I don't say, why did I have to ask?" Like, how do
Yeah.
you start
Yeah.
those hard conversations? And so we could drop off a casserole, and we can write a card, and we can say we're sorry, but really, how do you start a hard conversation around what people are going through, what they've gone through? And I
Right.
wanted to, I wanted to kind of just tackle that subject.
Yeah. And I mean, I think I often wonder, like, what runs through your mind when you hear like your sister, who I think maybe through all of your chaotic upbringing, she was a bit of an anchor, a bit of a
Hmm.
constant in your life.
Yeah.
And so the one thing that was maybe positive about your childhood is
Hmm.
now being taken away from you.
Yeah, and I didn't embark on, when I did the bike ride. That was kind of the culmination of the Cycle of Lives project, before writing the book. But
Mhm.
I had
Mhm.
interviewed tons of people, but I narrowed it down to about 15 that I had interviewed, for some of them a couple of years. I've talked to them for hours and hours and hours, multiple, multiple, multiple times, dozens of conversations over hours and hours and hours, to uncover their stories really in a deep, the most hidden corners of their mind, and uncovered
Mhm.
all the traumas in their life and how those affected their ability or inability to connect with people when they're going through difficult times. Because I really wanted to understand, like, the true depths of the thought of, what are people going through, or what have they gone through, and why is that important to understand when we're trying to connect with them about cancer or other things, right? And I thought to myself, geez, I lost my train of thought when we were talking about my sister. Sorry, I was,
That's okay. But
in the
just
back of
like,
my brain, I was thinking about my sister.
yeah.
That when it came to her ability to navigate the emotional stuff, she was a little bit more equipped,
Mhm.
right? And so yeah, she was an anchor for me. I realized that uh, what I had to grieve was what you spoke about. I didn't have to grieve my sister; I'd long grieved her. But
Mhm.
what I had to
Mhm.
grieve was that one person that, through all the chaos of my childhood, knew me, right?
Yeah.
There was only one. There's only one person that knew the shit I went through,
Right. Yeah.
and now she was gone. So nobody was gonna know about my childhood. Nobody could care. Nobody could get me. Nobody could understand, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's the thing that I needed to grieve. And so, um, and everybody has things they need to grieve. Mine's no worse or better than anybody else, but that's I kind of didn't learn that until I did the bike ride, where I just
Yeah.
went, oh shoot, I'm never gonna have that person that knows me like that.
And so, you had the opportunity to speak to a number of people,
Mhm.
and cancer is an interesting thing in a sense that not all that often do you kind of get like, hey, your time is coming to an end? And it seems strange to think that there is some element of positivity to maybe a life being cut short by a cruel disease. But I think about maybe someone who passes away in a car accident and it's very, very sudden. There's no opportunity for closure, no opportunity to say things, no opportunity to have that one conversation you wished you could have had, things like that. And in this situation, you're given the opportunity to have some of those conversations and say what needs to be said. And so I feel like there's like a strange element of mercy to it,
Mhm.
ironically. But I'm thinking you've conversed with a number of people who are terminally ill. You know, when you converse with people who know that there's a very genuine timeline here. You know, we often think I got lots of time. Like I'm 41 years old, and I think, man, I probably got another 40 years. Kind of
Right.
thing.
Right.
Natural thought process. But now you're talking to people who are like, you might have 6 weeks, six
Yeah.
months, whatever. What stands out to you? And I guess every conversation will be unique and individual, and this is why you wrote the book, Cycle of
Hmm.
Lives. But
Hmm.
I'm just thinking, what stands out to you as from these people who are sharing with you their stories as their lives are drawing to a close?
Yeah, it's very insightful. Your thoughts there, and there's no greater truth than there is that silver lining with something like that, where you do have the time to kind of reconcile, to connect, or to whatever. There's no greater truth than that doesn't make it any easier to connect. I can't
Mhm,
tell you, John, how many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people I've talked to that lost somebody to cancer, or they were going through cancer themselves and they survived, or they were caregivers or doctors or whatever, who will say, yeah, I didn't really talk about this, or I didn't talk about that. Like, I just, not that long ago, I talked to somebody and I go, so you took care of your dad as they were going through terminal cancer? And she's like, yeah. She goes, and the really tough thing was, my dad was this kind of person that wouldn't let anybody take care of him. Like he was the rock, he was a solid guy. And I end up being the person like changing his freaking feeding tube in his stomach. And I'm like,
mhm,
like he's got to be just completely raw with embarrassment and all this
mhm.
passion, because nobody can take care of him. And I go, wow, that's a good gift. And she goes, yeah, but I never really talked to him about like how it feels. Like I never felt
Yeah.
safe to talk about the emotional side of it. And I telling you, at some level, that basically is true with everybody I spoke to. So everybody had some truth in the statement and had some experience in the statement of, it's just really hard to talk to people about the emotional aspects of trauma. And so, especially with cancer, even if we have that silver lining.
Mhm.
So, to answer your question specifically, what did I find out from people? It was one, that everybody's just living their lives. Nobody thinks anything is spectacular. You talk to
Mhm.
people, your backstory is spectacular, but you're just like, whatever, it's just me. So I think that's fascinating. When you uncover those stories, we can learn stuff from that. That was one. Number two is was shocking, John. I'm talking about people who were very deep emotional, not everyone, but most of them were very deep emotional, connected, you know, empathetic people or whatever. But they all told me, yeah, I've never really ever talked about X. Or, yeah, I've just never really explored this thing about my life or whatever. And I'm just sitting there going, wow, man, we all just bury stuff. We all just keep so much trauma, stress, negativity, pain, difficulty just boxed up inside, and we just leave it to rot, and or we secure it up so much so that we're never going to let it out, and it just sits there and festers. And everybody has that. Everybody's going through something or has
Yeah.
gone through something that's just absolutely unbelievably painful. And if we have a little bit of insight into it, it might make us understand who they are and where they're coming from, and allow us to connect with them. I was just
Mm.
shocked by the stuff people told me. And I'm like, wow, man, I would have never guessed. And they would have been like, yeah, you would never know, because nobody knows. I never talk about this
Right.
kind of
And
stuff. And I'm like, what?
what's fascinating though, I think, is in one sense you're a safe person to share these things with
Yeah,
because there's no deep emotional connection there in one sense. Maybe it formed,
it
but
formed.
you're a safe person. This is why therapy is a thing. You can go talk
Right,
to your
right. Oh, yeah.
therapist and
Yeah.
I mean, the joke is I'm a coach, not a therapist, but the
Yeah.
irony is, nutrition is the cover story, right?
Yeah.
When we're working with people, it's
Oh my
almost
God.
never really about the food, right?
Yeah. So my wife, I'd be on the phone with someone. She'd walk by and, whatever. And then I'd finish my interview and go grab a glass of wine with her, cook dinner or whatever. And she's like, dude, you can't ask people the kind of questions you ask them. You can't ask somebody that. And I'm like, I have to. Like, I
Yeah.
have to ask those questions. And strangely enough, everybody that ended up making the book, they didn't have any barrier to
Mhm.
asking questions, and we uncovered things that they had never explored before ever. So that's what makes the book, I think, so special, because not every story could I get out of people, and not every story could they tell me, and those people didn't make the book. But
Mhm.
and no fault of theirs, maybe more fault of mine. But the people that did make the book, the beauty of their stories is they're as deep and authentic and real and exposing as possible, because they
Mhm.
bought into this idea of, if we're limited in the way we can connect to people because of our traumas, because of their traumas, because of our past traumas, if I give everybody everything and I let them know how it affected me as a oncologist, or as somebody taking care of somebody that's dying, or having gone through cancer myself, if they can frame it around that, maybe it can help them in their conversations with others.
Mhm.
And everybody bought into that. And so I think the stories really work because we can relate to, oh crap. Yeah,
Yeah.
I get what it's like to have a parent abandon you. I
Yeah.
get what it's like to have somebody in your life commit suicide. I get what it's like to be bullied as a kid. Like, I
Yeah.
get those things. So now that I know them about you, maybe we can frame, what you're going through now a little bit more deep, deep and connected on a deeper level.
Mm. I think there's so much more to explore, and I think I have to put you on my 2024 callback list.
Ah, let's do it. Let's do it.
But as always, I like to ask my guests, anyone listening to the conversation today, what do you hope they would take away? What's one nugget of wisdom you hope they might take away from hearing this conversation today?
Uh, we haven't even talked about it, but I'll tell you the thing. Talking to you has really made me um, welcome, is the thought that you can be intentionally optimistic, like, I mean, anybody could find themselves in any kind of a bad situation and realize,
Mhm.
oh, that's my life. I just got to accept that's the way it is. Or you can be intentionally optimistic and go, no, it can be better. Like, it can be better. You can make it
Mhm.
better. So I don't know. Talking to you makes me feel good about that idea that, if you can develop some compassion for yourself, and you can, go on a journey of discovery, and you can, maybe purposefully transform yourself, away from, or pivot away from your reality, and be optimistic that the next step is a better one, or tomorrow is going to be a better day. I mean, what better way to live is that? So I
Mm.
don't know. I guess my words of wisdom would be, I don't care what you're going through or where you're at in life. I mean, the next step and the next hour can be better. Absolutely,
Mm.
100%.
I love that. Well, David, thank you so much for being on today, and look forward to when we get to chat again next.
Let's do it again, John. We'll keep talking.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become, and I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.